American excellence is celebrated and recognized the world over. But as Americans approaching our 250th anniversary, do we understand the policies, the qualities, and the people who have made our nation excellent? I'm Christy Burton Brown, a constitutional attorney, author, and homeschool mom of three. On this podcast, we'll examine the ideas and people who've made American excellence a real and tangible thing that we all can become. Hi, I'm Christy Burton Brown. Welcome to the first episode of American Excellence. First, I want to introduce to you what this podcast is designed to do, and then we'll get right into discussing our material and a very special person on our podcast today. So first of all, the idea of American excellence is something that's been a concept our nation has subscribed to since our very founding. To be an American is to be different than the rest of the world. To be an American is to embrace certain character qualities that have made our nation the innovative, independent, free, God-honoring country that we have sought to be for so many decades. Now, has America ever fallen short of its ideals? Ideals like high character, honoring God, loving family, equality for all people. Yes, and yes. In every instance, Americans across the centuries have fallen short. But what makes America unique is that we don't give up. We continue to say that because we are the world's superpower, because we are in a position in the world to shine a light to other nations, we're not going to give up on that pursuit of excellence, on that pursuit of character, on the pursuit of being the freest, best nation in the world that fixes our mistakes when we get it wrong, that tries again when we fall down, and that shows other nations and other peoples a path forward. So in this podcast, we'll do a variety of things. Some days we're going to discuss the character qualities and ideals that have made America an excellent nation since our founding, and even a little bit before when our founders were coming up with the ideas of our nation. On some episodes of the podcast, we'll discuss key policy issues that make America unique and that continue to help America lead into the next century. And here's the thing we're going to focus on. We're going to focus on 250 Americans because we are about to celebrate our 250th anniversary. So I'm going to introduce you to 250 Americans, some of whom will probably be familiar to you, maybe a couple presidents thrown in there, but many of whom I don't think you'll ever have heard of before. These are people that were leaders in their sphere of life, and over the years, their names have been forgotten. But that doesn't take away from the power, the credibility, and the excellence of what they did in their field to move America to the point in history we are today. In fact, with many of these 250 people, you will be able to ask the question, where would America be today without their contribution? So I'm hoping that through these episodes of American Excellence, you'll not only get to meet some really unique, interesting individuals, but also be inspired by lessons that you can take away from their lives and apply to yours today or to your children as you teach your children. Some of these stories you can use to encourage your friends. There's just so many options on how we can use these people's stories. So I'll make a disclaimer. My husband says I'm famous for always making disclaimers with everything I say, but I think it's important. I don't agree with everything these 250 people did, but they were significant in American history. They made a significant contribution. So I'm not necessarily setting them up because their entire life was a perfect example of how to live. I think there's only one person who meets that qualification, and that is Jesus, who is also God. And so I think any person is going to have flaws. There's going to be moments in their story, moments in their history where they made bad decisions. And some of those bad decisions, they corrected it and it led them to make the discovery or the success or the moment of excellence that we're going to discuss on the podcast. But I will definitely set out that I don't 100% agree with all of the 250 people we're going to talk about. You probably won't either. You will probably have a few favorites, just like I do. But all these 250 people, I'm setting them out because largely they've been forgotten in history, or there's a specific part of their story that people have forgotten when they discuss their lives. So with that said, we'll also point out these people have long, storied, complicated lives. Some of them actually died early in their 20s. but many of them lived very long lives. And so rather than examining every single facet or detail of their entire life, this podcast is going to be designed to highlight the overarching theme of their life or a particular instance, event, decision where they shaped American history and demonstrated that American excellence that we're talking about. I'll give you a short example on that. We will at one point talk about Harry Truman. You know who he is, U.S. president. Ryan Holiday actually wrote in his book, The Right Thing, how Harry Truman was an unexpected leader and kind of took that perspective on his life. But rather than taking either the presidential perspective or the unexpected leader perspective, when we discuss him on this podcast, we're going to talk about how Harry Truman was once a racist and he then became a civil rights leader. So that's a unique and little known aspect of his life that I think really is important in the American story, that people can start off with a wrong perspective. They can start off not believing in the equality of all human beings, or they can start out, not having good character, but it is possible for anyone to change and be different. And so that's something that we'll highlight with Harry Truman's life when we talk about him. But he is not the first person for us to discuss. Her name is Orelena Hawks Puckett. She lived from 1844 to 1939. And as I tell you about her, I'm also going to read from some key sources that I found that really describe important aspects of her life. And I'll be sure at the end of this podcast to list off those sources for you so you also can go learn more about this really interesting lady. She was known as a midwife in the Appalachian Mountains, specifically the area of Southern Virginia. She was born in North Carolina, moved to Virginia when she got married. And she is known for delivering over 1,000 babies in about a 45 to 50 year period in that very poor region of the nation. And one of the most fascinating things about her is that she did not lose a single mother or baby in delivery. And as a midwife, she would go in place of a doctor in many situations because there were few doctors in that area of the nation. She specifically lived in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And that's where she delivered these 1,000 babies. And she delivered babies over the course of 5 generations. So there would be like 5 generations of one family where Orelena Puckett would have delivered a baby in each generation. But her story didn't actually start out happy. It started out with a lot of tragedy in her own personal life. As was the case with many people in that region and in those years, she never learned to read or write. There's actually historical debate over how her name is spelled because she could never write it down herself. Also, instead of getting paid for her services, this was also something that was common in the region, she would trade food for her services. So people would pay her in food or other supplies when she delivered their babies. And some sources say that towards the end of the time when she was delivering babies, which was right around 1938, 1939, people began to pay her $1 or maybe as high as $6 to deliver their baby. And remember, this was a very poverty-stricken area. So trading and bartering for services was very, very common. So not only did she come from a very poor region and come out of poverty, she wasn't educated, she also lost 24 babies of her own. And yes, you did hear that right. 24 children of her own. Not a single one of her children ever lived beyond a few months. And in fact, the majority of them died during birth or shortly thereafter. Her first child, a daughter, her name is Julia, and she died at the age of 7 months from diphtheria, a disease that was practically unable to be treated back then, that especially little babies would quickly die from. And then after that, every one of her 23 additional children died even sooner than 7 months. Now, when people look at what happened, they think that most likely it was the Rh factor, or Rh disease, that caused the death of her 23 children, every single one of them other than her first child. And if you have negative blood and you've ever had children, if you're a woman, you probably are familiar with the Rh factor. But if you aren't familiar with it, I'm going to read from Stanford Medicine because they explain what goes on with Rh negative factor and the Rh disease. So they say, quote, the Rh negative birth parent's immune system sees the baby's Rh positive red blood cells as foreign. Your immune system responds by making antibodies to fight and destroy these foreign cells. Your immune system stores these antibodies in case these foreign cells come back again. It can happen in a future pregnancy. You are now Rh sensitized. Rh sensitization normally isn't a problem with a first pregnancy. Most issues occur in future pregnancies with another Rh positive baby. During that pregnancy, your antibodies cross the placenta to fight the Rh positive cells in your baby's body. As the antibodies destroy the cells, your baby gets sick. Your baby could have jaundice, heart failure, and enlarged organs. That's the end of what Stanford Medicine explains, a very tragic, sad situation. And many years ago, in the 1800s and early 1900s, they had not discovered Rh factor, and they didn't know that if a mom had Rh factor in her blood, she had negative blood, but the baby had positive blood due to the father's blood. They didn't know that that would negatively interact, and many, many babies died from this, either through a miscarriage or shortly after birth because they got all those conditions that Stanford Medicine explains with enlarged organs and heart failure and jaundice. And if you imagine medicine back in the 18 and early 1900s, they didn't know how to treat those conditions either. So this is why history believes that this is why Orelena Puckett's 24 children died. Again, her first one died from diphtheria at the age of 7 months, but every single one after that is believed to have had positive blood and to have died from the Rh factor that today would have been very fixable, but back then it just wasn't. So what she did, though, is after that absolute tragedy, she had those 24 babies from the age of 18 to 37. So for about a 20-year period of her life, she had 24 babies that she had to bury. But right around when she turned 50 years old, someone came to her door and called for her to help their wife deliver a baby. And so she went with this guy, went to his house, helped deliver the baby, and she became the area midwife. From the age of 50 until the year before she died, she delivered 1,000 babies, and again, never lost a single baby or a single mother in these deliveries as a midwife. And so she turned her personal tragedy of not being able to have a single living child of her own into an amazing ability to help give life and bring life to so many other families in the region. 1,000 babies owing their lives, at least in part, to her amazing midwifery work. And, those mothers as well, because many of them were at risk of dying during the delivery. And she was just so skilled in what she did. Despite her inability to read or write, she gained a skill in something that was so important in that poverty-stricken region and was able to bring life in a way that she didn't herself get to experience. There's a quote from Blue Ridge Country that writes about Orelena. And they say, quote, "Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays Orelena Hawks Puckett from the swift completion of her appointed rounds." And then it continues, "When the roads were icy, tacking nails to the soles of her overshoes offered improved footing. For the longer distances, she relied on hoof power, aboard an old white mule, Rhodey, or a red horse called Roy. If she were fortunate, she might catch a ride from a passing horse and buggy, or, in more modern times, a motorized vehicle." And so if you think about the time period she lived from 1844 to 1939, modes of transportation were constantly changing over that period. And so that's why she did anything from walking miles to delivering a baby, to being able to ride a horse, to a horse and buggy, to a car, because transportation was developing quickly over that nearly 100-year period of time. NC History Center, another great source about her life, reports that, quote, "Her legacy of care continues at the Orelena Hawks Puckett Institute in Asheville, North Carolina, which works to promote and strengthen child, parent, and family development." It's amazing, I think, that, something she focused on in the way that she could, delivering babies and building families when she really couldn't have one of her own, turned into this nonprofit institute that today serves to help develop families through children and parent interaction and a number of other ways. And that institute, again, is in North Carolina, which is her birth state, even though she did a lot of her work in Virginia in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And so I think as we go over her life and just the amazing perseverance that this lady had to continue on after so much tragedy, I've thought of, I think, specifically 5 lessons from her life that I think we can apply to the idea of American excellence. First of all, you're definitely not too old to find your calling. She did not become a midwife until about the age of 50. after she had had all this personal tragedy, 20 years of personal tragedy. She was still around. She didn't give up. And when someone came, knocked on her door and called for her to come, she came right away and she found her calling. And she did it practically until she died. Secondly, she turned her greatest pain into light and life for others. I think that's an opportunity that each one of us often has in our life, is we can either, hide our pain away, hide away our tragedy and keep it very personal because it hurts and we don't necessarily want the world to know about it. Or sometimes we have the opportunity to do what Orelena did and say, I'm going to use my pain to benefit others and to give them something I didn't have the opportunity to have. I think that's quite the story and the example. And not everyone maybe thinks they're strong enough to do that. But I think sometimes when you put yourself out there and you try to do it and you start, sometimes starting is the hardest piece. But again, when that guy knocked on her door, she went with him and she unleashed the ability to go do this and give light and love and life to others, even though it wasn't present in her own home. Third, I think we can see that some of the most forgotten places create some of the strongest people. And I don't know that it's necessarily, the poverty or forgotten aspect of the region where she lived in the Appalachian Mountains that created her. But what I think we have to allow God to build that character and strength in our hearts and our lives. But I do think a lot of places, in America get written off as, well, no one good can come out of there. And that's actually what they said about Nazareth, where Jesus was from, that no one good could come out of there. And yet that's where he grew up and that's where he came from. And so I think never writing off a place or a person, because anyone can do something great and they can come from anywhere. Your circumstances and where you're raised and where you live don't ever have to define you, because that character and strength can be built into every single one of us. Fourth, I think it's amazing that Orelena kept going until a year before her death. And if you read the sources, they actually say it was the fact that she was actually forced out of her home because of some building that was happening in the area that caused her to have to end her midwifery a year before her death. Otherwise, she probably would have literally kept on going until the day she died. But so many people like to quit before their time is up and maybe take it a little easier than they have to. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with enjoying retirement or doing some fun things in your life if you maybe think you've earned that at a certain point. But she's such a good example of saying there's still people out there who need my help, who need the talents and skills that I can provide. And I'm not quitting. As long as there's people who need help, I'm going to keep going because I'm here for a reason. I'm still alive and breathing and able to get out there and help people. And so might as well keep going until the very end. She's a great model of that. And then finally, I read in one source that she was known for both her compassion and her skill. I think this is another really important lesson as we look at what American excellence is. You can have skill, but not be a good person to be around and sort of hold it over other people and demand that they perform just like you do. Or you can have a lot of compassion, but don't take the time and the effort to build the skill that allows you to use your compassion in a way that benefits others. And so I think those two things that Orelena was known for, compassion and skill, go hand in hand in such an important way when we really seek to offer our lives in service to others. They are key components, I would say, in success that lasts and in real stories of American excellence. So, as I promised to do, I'll mention a few sources that if you want to read more about Orelena Puckett, or if you would like to just confirm some of the details I've given you in this story, you can go to Archaeohistories on Twitter or x.com. They cited women in world history. You can also go to Blue Ridge Country, which talks about her. The Library of Virginia has something called Virginia Changemakers that talks about her life. And then the North Carolina History Center on the Civil War, Emancipation, and Reconstruction also talks about her life. So those are several sources you can go to find out more. I appreciate you joining us today on this episode of American Excellence. We've covered the very first out of 250 people that we will talk about all throughout this year as we celebrate 250 years of America being a nation, of the United States of America lighting the way throughout the world. I'm very happy to have started today with Orelena Hawks Puckett, a woman who came from a poverty-stricken area, who decided to turn her tragedy into light and life for others, and didn't quit until practically the day she died. excellent example for every one of us, one that I hope I can follow in my life, and I hope you can too. Until next time, I'm Christy Burton Brown. Thanks for listening to American Excellence.